So we've a little bit of time for some additional questions, and I think some of those additional questions are going to be provided to me on my screen. But I'm going to kick off with a couple of questions myself, if I may. And Anna Shakespeare, I know you're sort of participating in being a moderator, but I wonder, are you willing to take a question? Okay, just make sure you unmute when you're. So anyway, and I still think you're muted, are you?
Yeah, I am.
Okay, so let me just develop a little theme here as I was listening. And Emer Smith, I'm going to throw a part of this question to you as well. So again, a little bit of background to where my question is coming from. As I mentioned at the outset, I remember attending lots of these sort of launches over time in the ESRI. And normally the question we were discussing was, why hadn't the program worked? Okay, that a lot of money had been spent trying to do creative things, and it all seemed, you know, very worthwhile. But very often we weren't doing evaluations that were getting positive results. Now, I think clearly today we are looking at positive results. And Teresa's presentation there really illustrated a number of things for me. That it seems like some of the things that really sort of seem to be helpful now are the notions of flexibility, you know, more tailored at an individual level. There's a sort of a local dimension to these sort of programs, and the issue of soft skills came up there as well. Okay, now here's the question for you, Anna. It strikes me that from a funder's perspective, some of these things are very scary. Okay, because if you're the centralized funding agency, you like to have, I think, a stronger, and when I say you, I mean the sort of, you know, people in that sort of a position, that very often spending the money on a more unified basis gives you a degree of comfort, because when you see things like flexibility and local dimensions, it can often seem a little bit experimental, which can be kind of scary for somebody like you who has to go back to the board or the department at the end of the year and say, well, you know, how was all the money spent? So, you know, it must be kind of difficult, and I'm just sort of interested to get your reflections. How do you engineer that sort of flexibility into the funding mechanisms, while at the same time making sure that you're sort of, you know, doing all the sort of the overview and governance pieces that you would need to do? So apologies if that's a really tricky question, but I would love to hear your reflections.
Well, that really is a sideball type question. Thank you, Alan. Very much appreciated. Look, what we're saying here, or what the report seems to be saying from an outcomes perspective, is what really works is that intensive intervention at an individual level. The distance travel tool work that has been done between ourselves and the Department of Rural and Community Development is further evidence of that, you know, employment and educational attainment as an end goal in and of itself is one part of the journey, but the person has many steps on the journey. And I think there's opportunity from a policy perspective, and I know Paul unfortunately can't join us from due to technical issues, but from a policy perspective there is opportunity for programme revision and review to reflect what works and what doesn't in the context of the learning from this programme, and how the programmes can be structured, because intensive work costs money, let's face it, and how do we prioritise where those supports go. So clearly the report authors have evidence or demonstrated, you know, what target groups SICAP isn't reaching and who haven't been in a position to reach for quite some time, and are they the target groups that we need to work towards reaching. The other thing from a funder's perspective is that, you know, the profile of unemployment, even since the data has been collected and this report has been published, and COVID, the nature of unemployment in Ireland has significantly changed. So that may not be government's priority, unfortunately, but it doesn't mean that it isn't something that needs to be considered, as in, you know, those more difficult to reach target groups. Clearly, we've heard the evidence from, you know, the exemplars from the Kerry Development Group participants, you know, a variety of profile of individuals with different support requirements around accessing the labour market or going back into further education and training. I mean, certainly when I met with the Minister and we did talk about this last week, one of his observations in relation to it was, you know, success from his personal perspective, having worked in a community development situation, was that an individual was in a position to sit down and engage with somebody for 20 minutes in a classroom. learning literacy skills, learning those social intervention skills. Emer has spoken about those soft skills, and they're often the most developed, the largest developmental opportunity that an individual can engage with, particularly those individuals as participants who have been whose experience has been intergenerational unemployment and disadvantage, and moving from that place to a place where you're a person in the labour market or you're a person in formal education is a massive journey. So I've probably not answered your question directly, but I think it's multifactorial, and I don't think it's quite as simple as perhaps, and I know you probably didn't set it out intentionally that way.
Yeah, no, I mean, actually, you've raised a whole heap of additional issues, which actually leads me to some of the questions I'd like to put to Emer. And the questions, Emer, that I would have for you are this sort of notion of, and I'm looking at you now as an education expert as well as an expert in what we're talking about today, but it strikes me that there are a lot of parallel lessons for the education system in terms of those notions around flexibility, local dimensions, the importance of soft skills. And I suppose my question is, has education learned those sort of lessons already, and are they doing those sort of things, or can they learn from what we're learning through this strand of research? And then to pick up some of the points that Anna was making there, we really should be viewing this more as a continuum, shouldn't we, rather than sort of bits and pieces, as sometimes the discussion goes. Don't forget to unmute.
I think mainstream education could learn a lot from programs like this. I think some of the alternative education provision raises a lot of the same issues around the tension between local flexibility and national consistency. We saw that with the Youth Reach provision and with the school completion program as well, where there's great capacity there to address local needs that can differ and develop a responsive approach at local level, linking into local services, again, which are all features of SICAP. I don't think we've been as good at that in mainstream education, because I think we are still quite a centralised system. There's some flexibility at school level, but we could be kind of more innovative, say, in DESH provision, which would be very closely paralleling a lot of the groups we're talking about here, about developing kind of local solutions and local responses.
Okay, very good. If Teresa is still there, I presume you are still there, Teresa. Is Teresa still there?
Yes, I'm still here, Alan. Yeah.
Teresa, yeah, just another question for you, and this is sort of taking a more European perspective on it. Are we doing enough of this sort of evaluation generally, and sort of where does Ireland stack up, do you think, relative to EU partners? So that's item one. And item two is this an example where we sort of have learned through evaluation and we're doing things a little bit better than was previously the case? So, sometimes evaluation, you do it, just to make sure things have been done appropriately. But possibly a more constructive dimension of evaluation is, of course, that you learn the lessons and you're continually improving. So I'd just be curious to get your sense of where you think Ireland lines up relative to the European partners.
I think in terms of counterfactual assessments, they're not widespread across, they're not common as such in any member state. They are quite difficult types of evaluations to undertake. Some member states have more, I guess, even a tradition of having larger administrative data sets than Ireland would have, and of sharing those between government departments and making them available for evaluation purposes. And in those situations, counterfactual assessments in those member states are more feasible to do. But there have been a number of very very interesting counterfactual assessments done, particularly by the Department of Employment Affairs and Social Protection on the Jobs Plus and the Back to Work Enterprise Allowance Scheme. So it's not like we are kind of below average in Ireland on the counterfactual, side of things. But it's just that I think some countries, their administrative data sets and systems are such that it makes using data across departments and ministries much easier.
Okay, thanks for that. I see a question here, and I just need to clarify something. So somebody is saying that I've been making reference to evaluation of programs not having been positive, but of course somebody pointing out that SICAP evaluations of SICAP previously have actually found positive effects. You are right. Whoever submitted the question, I was talking about the sort of the area of the non-positive results are the evaluation of the much broader spectrum of training and employment programs. And they're partly in Ireland, but also it's kind of an international finding. To be honest, it's been always one of the great mysteries in the literature in this area, how difficult it is to actually find positive effects. But important to get that clarification in there that previous SICAP evaluations have indeed been positive, and I think they get more positive as time goes on. Adele, I'm going to come to you with a question, and this is a sort of in your capacity with a perspective on the broader labour market. A theme in a number of the questions coming through is with higher numbers of unemployed people, who are going to be seeking assistance, the more intensive type programs may well come under pressure. And I suppose the question is, do you have any sort of a sense of how is the government going to deal with this issue of having sort of almost, potentially the numbers of unemployed people on the books that were of the level that might have been there in the 1980s or certainly during the Great Recession, and how does government prioritise then the sort of the broad programs to cater for a group of people relative to the very intensive intervention? So any thought of that? And that's kind of a summary of a number of questions that have come in.
Sure, thank you, Alan. So it is the case that the unemployment rate has changed drastically over the last few months, standing at currently around 18% due to the COVID crisis. Now, it is the case that these individuals who are recent additions to the unemployment, they're short-term unemployed. So we would expect that these individuals have a greater attachment to the labour force than the individuals that we are specifically talking about in terms of their educational attainment, their up-to-date skills, also in terms of their social networks and their networks in terms of gaining another employment or moving back into employment. Obviously, supports are going to be needed, and there's varying degrees to which individuals will need supports. In the past, we have developed PEC scores, which you will be familiar with. So this is a probability of exiting employment. And departments can use this score. So looking at characteristics of individuals across a broad range of characteristics such as age, gender, educational attainment, past employment history, sector, a large range of criteria. And ranking individuals across that can potentially categorize people who need more assistance. So the individuals that we were looking at were very long-term unemployed, 2 years or more, and they had very low levels of educational attainment. So they would be seen as the most disadvantaged and the ones that would find it most difficult to progress into employment and need tailored, individualized supports. Perhaps group supports would be more appropriate for individuals in certain sectors or who are short-term unemployed. And there are some individuals who will not need support at all. They will move quite quickly once the jobs become available, and they will move quite seamlessly into an employment. So there's a large range of issues there.
Okay, thanks for that, Adele. So we're essentially coming towards the end. Apologies, I might have been muted there. So I was just saying we're approaching noon now, so I might begin to bring proceedings to a close. It's been a really fascinating morning. It's obviously it was a fascinatingly interesting report for the variety of reasons, as I touched on earlier on. There's both methodological interest in the study, and then of course the results are really, really fascinating, and there's an awful lot there for people to get their teeth into. It is interesting. I think a lot of the questions that are coming across are around that notion of sort of distilling the real lessons from this SciCap work and the success of these programs, obviously carrying on doing and expanding and intensifying what's been done through PUBL and the agencies, but also then this notion that we should be trying to learn about other employment programs elsewhere in the system to get a sort of sense of what would work there. It's probably another conference for another day where we might broaden out and have those sorts of discussions. But it's had a lot of really interesting material has come up. The other thing is great to have the video of the folks talking about their experiences. I remember a really depressing story about a very senior academic who once made the point that he only dealt in data sets, and he really felt he didn't know people. And in order to get to know people, he was going to look at the various lines on his Excel spreadsheet. He thought that was a good way of getting to know the people a little bit better. I thought that was one of the more depressing stories I've ever heard, if anybody thought they could get to know people by looking at the line on a spreadsheet. So to actually hear people talking about their experiences, I thought was really, really wonderful. So I enjoyed the video. And hopefully, when COVID is eventually behind us, it would be great to have those sort of participants in that broader group actually, be it in the ESRI or PUBL or whatever like that. So when we get back to having face-to-face conferences, we can hear more about the experiences, because it really did enliven certainly my understanding of everything. So with that, I think it's probably an idea to draw things to a close. So again, I just want to congratulate my ESRI colleagues, Emer, Adele, Judith, formerly not with us anymore, she moved on, and Seamus, of course, produced a great report, and as ever then the collaboration with Anna and her colleagues in PUBL and with the colleagues in the department, absolutely great. And Teresa, thanks you for coming along as well and providing your expertise. So it's been a great morning. Thanks so much to everybody. I don't know if it's still raining outside. Maybe it's eased off and we can have a little stroll before the afternoon's work begins. So anyway, best wishes to everybody, and hopefully we'll be talking again soon. So bye-bye.